Hi everyone. Welcome to lesson 4 of the digital drawing course. Today we will be looking at layers, line weights, how to create a plot table, and probably most importantly, how to print whatever you have been drawing in AutoCAD. Previously we have worked on a plan, a very simple plan of a building with some wall thicknesses, with a curved corners, and then we have created a couple of windows and doors within those walls, and then finally hatched the the walls. Today we're going to look to use that plan again, but begin to define what layers each of these lines sits on, and therefore what line weights each of these lines has. You'll see in the plans in front of you on the screen, these are very simple plans by 6A architects for a project called Blackstone House. You'll see here that there are two line weights used, very simple, but we can see how the use of line weights makes it really clear to read what is structure, what is solid, and what is either furniture or a door or something in the background. And then if we look at this plan as well, this is potentially a more complex plan, but again, line weights are incredibly important to be able to help other people to understand what information we're trying to communicate in the plan. If we zoom in, this is the same plan, just zoomed in. You'll see how wall thicknesses are defined by a thicker line, and then we have a couple of other lines that are being used. One is a thin, solid line for things such as furniture in the toilets, and then we have a dashed line which shows internal joinery, so the inside of the cabinets, and then there are a couple of other lines, which is the dashed red line, which generally indicates something that has been demolished, and in this drawing, the dashed blue line shows a roof light above. But with all of these lines, you can see how it is important to begin to define what a line signifies in order for it to be printed a certain way and in order for it to be legible, readable and understandable. So if we open up our lesson for AutoCAD, so this is the thing that you saved last week. This is where we got to last week with looking at stretching and other more advanced tools. Today we're going to look at layers and line weights. So if we look at all of the things that we drew over the last 3 weeks, we have been drawing all of these lines. I remember that we joined these lines together in order to create a solid shape to help us hatch this area of the wall. You can see here we have lots of different lines. They all mean different things, but they've all been drawn on, if we look over here, layer 0. So what we are now going to do is look at how we can make this appear more like a wall, and how we can make it really clear that this is either an opening or a window. The way that we do that is by using layers. So this is your properties bar, and so far we haven't looked at this at all, this area of the screen. What we're going to start doing is looking at our layers. You'll see here we have 2 layers so far. I've created one of these layers. The layers allow us to be able to define the color of a line, the thickness of a line, whether it prints or not, as well as what it signifies. So you can see that on this very simple plan, so far we've been able to get away with not defining any of these layers. As plans become more complex, it is increasingly important that plans have different types of line defined in different types of ways. So if I just open up a plan that is a little bit more complex, so if I just go and find any plan that I have, let's go for a more complex plan. So if I just open, this is a drawing that I have done previously. This is a more complex drawing. So this is how a drawing will appear when you get into practice and you start producing drawings that are for construction. So this is a drawing for a builder. But you can see how a plan can become increasingly complex, and how it's really important that each of these things is visible for you whilst you're drawing it. Imagine if all of these lines were all the same color, it would become difficult to be able to easily separate what each of these lines were and what they meant. And then obviously when we print it, it's important that it is really clear to whoever is looking at the plan that something is either existing or new, solid, a piece of furniture, etc. So if we look at this plan, you can see how different line weights have been used to signify different things. And again, as we come down here, you can see how the complexity of the plan has been, we've almost tried to avoid an overly complicated appearance of the plan by using different colours. Now, the key thing to say is that each of these colours should print black. So each of these colours just means something different within our drawing. And in essence, I've chosen green here to signify block and brick. But if we look at the PDF of this drawing, so after I've printed it, the drawing looks like this. So you can see that almost everything has printed out black, and the different colours have signified different line weights. So if we zoom in a lot, you can see that the green lines have printed out relatively thick, and that helps when we're looking at the drawing. That helps us to identify what is a solid and what is something else. So you can see here that the solid wall has printed out slightly thicker, and other elements such as the windows or the kitchen has printed out thinner. And if we zoom all the way out, you can see that this helps when we're looking at the drawing. Okay, now obviously our drawings are going to be a little bit more simple than this at the moment, so we can start with a fewer number of layers or lines. But if we go back to our AutoCAD and we leave this drawing, we go back to our simple plan. The first thing to do is to have a look at where you find your layers. So layers are always located here within the properties bar. And what I said is that so far everything that we've been drawing has been on layer 0. So if you select something, it should tell you what layer it is on. So layer 0 is just the default layer that comes with a basic AutoCAD drawing. What we will do though, when we have set up our layers, is that we'll either be able to select the layer and then start drawing with that layer, and obviously everything that we draw will be on the selected layer, or we can do it the other way around and select the lines and then place them onto a layer. So you all have to create your own layers, and that means that you all have the opportunity to decide what system of layers you're going to set up. You can either do it similar to the way that it would be done in practice, which is that you would have a layer for solid walls or structure, you will have a layer for doors, you will have a layer for windows, a layer for furniture. So you will identify everything that you will draw in your plan and give it its own layer. Or because the drawings that you're going to be doing are going to be a bit simpler, purely because of the fact that they're not going to get built, you can actually just choose layers that identify thicknesses, for example. So you could choose 3 or 4 layers, and one could be a thick line, one could be a medium thickness line, and one could be a thin line. And then maybe you could either have a grey line or a dotted line to give yourself a little bit more flexibility. Now, the way that we set up layers is we type in layer and click or hit enter, and this shows you all of the layers that exist within your file, within your drawing. And you can see at the moment we have 2 layers. Now this one was a default layer, so 0 was the default layer, and def points is something that I have created, which we will talk about later on in this lesson. But in order to create a new layer, you can just come down to the bottom of this box and click on New Layer in the bottom left-hand corner. And when you click on New Layer, you're able to create the new layer, and you're able to define all of these points. So you can define the color of the line, the name of the layer, how thick it is, whether it's locked, whether it's printable, whether it's a dashed line or a dotted line, and whether it's transparent or not. So you can contain all of this information, all of these possible variables within one layer. So I'm going to rename this layer structure, but you could also just choose to say thick line. I'll do that instead. Thick line. I'll spell that correctly. So with the thick line, you can then choose the color by clicking on this little box, and you'll see here that AutoCAD has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 default colors. So these are the colors that AutoCAD wants you to use within most of your drawings, and the idea is that these all actually print black, but when you look at them on your AutoCAD screen, they appear as these colors, and they appear as these colors so that you can easily identify the difference between layers. So the general rule is, the general convention is that magenta, this pink line, represents the thicker lines, and red represents thinner lines, and obviously we go from thick towards thin through all of the rest of the colors. So if my thick line is going to be magenta, thick line, and then we get to choose its thickness, and I'm going to go 0.25 millimeters, which doesn't sound very thin, but it is a good thickness. We're going to go solid or continuous, and we are going to allow it to print. So if you clicked that, it would mean it would be a line that you can draw, but it never prints. So for this line, we're going to have it printable, and it's going to be there's going to be no transparency, so it's going to be a solid line, a thick full fill line. That's my first layer, and that's how you create layers. When I talked about these basic colors, the kind of generic colors that exist within AutoCAD, I've just put together this, not that. I've just put together a quick explanation of the generic colors and the thicknesses that work best with these colors. So you can see here, color 6, magenta, and it's set at 0.25 millimeters. Now these thicknesses they're used by a lot of practices for architectural drawings. So the reason I have put this here is in order to help anybody who wants to set layers at certain thicknesses. These are good thicknesses. So a thin line is 0.05 millimeters, and it prints black. And a thicker line is this magenta color, and again, 0.25 millimeters, and again it prints black. So I will upload this to the WebLearn Digi recordings folder so that people can have a look at this. This is called a plot table. So a plot table is the way in which you tell AutoCAD what to print. So you're telling AutoCAD, if I draw a line in this color, it will print at 0.05. It prints black, but it's nice and thin. And if I print a line, if I draw a line in green, then it will print at 0.13 millimeters, and it will also print black. And again, if I go all the way to pink, again it prints black, but it's thicker. It's almost twice as thick as the green. This is called a plot table. And again, I have set up a plot table and uploaded it to the Digi recordings folder, and I will show you how to import that into your AutoCAD so that this is the generic setup that you have for all of your prints. So we're back in AutoCAD, and what I'm going to do is I'm just going to complete creating my new layers. So this layer is going to be medium line, and I'm going to make it a green. So you can see from the line that we saw before, this is a medium thickness, 0.13, and then I'll make a thin line, which is red, which is the thinnest line. So it's a medium line. It's going to show on the screen as green, but it will print as black. 0.13. We want it continuous. It is going to print, and it will have no transparency. So that's that one set up. And then the next layer that I'm going to create will be a thin line. I'll make it so that it is visible as red. It's 0.05, which is the thinnest line. Again, it's solid, and then it has zero transparency. So that means that that there is no transparency on it. And the final line that I'm going to do is a grey line, because as you've seen in some of the drawings, sometimes it's quite helpful to have a grey line. Now, the difference is that when you go away from these, the generic master colours, the red, yellow, green, cyan, blue, magenta, white, if you select another colour, it will print as that colour. So you can see there are all of these colours available, and then here are the master colours that exist. So I'm going to choose this grey. I'm choosing this grey because I think it's a nice grey. Maybe that one, 253 colour. And because it's not one of these top colours, when I select that colour, it will print as that colour. We can even try and choose another line appearance. So if you go on your lines, and instead of continuous, you tick manage. If you click manage there and load, we have lots of different options. So we have dashed, we have a thinner dash, we have a long dash. So I'm going to click dashed and add. Click on it, OK. So you can see now that my grey line will always appear as dashed and print as dashed. So I've set up four layers of my own, and then obviously the generic layer that was there already, and the def points, which we'll talk about later. But with 4 layers, I think that's enough to be able to begin to add a bit more clarity to the plan that we've already drawn. So I'll just close that. And now what we should be able to do is, if we select a line and we go over to the properties bar, we should be able to tell AutoCAD what lines we can select in the way that we normally do. And if you see here, I've selected the hatching as well. I can hold down Shift, which is the button, the arrow pointing up on the left of your keyboard. If I hold down Shift and press it, that deselects something that you don't want selecting. And now I can do the same. I can go down and I can make that a thick line as well. I can do the same for this piece of wall. So what I'm doing is I am slowly but surely going through my plan and telling AutoCAD that these lines are walls. I'm going to make this a wall as well, actually. And obviously you can either do it right at the top, thick line, or you can do it here as well and say layer, thick line. So there are two ways of defining it. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to make the door a medium line. You see, as soon as I click on it, it turns green. I'm going to make the two windows and the hatches thin lines. So if I go over now and thin line and press escape, you can see that I have been able to change all of the layers, all of the lines on our drawing, so that they are now thick lines, thin lines, and medium lines. I'm just going to click this wobbly shape that we created, and I'm going to turn that into the grey line. So you can see if you zoom in a lot, it's a dashed line, but that dash isn't great. So we could actually change the dash to something more apparent. The way that we would do that, to make any changes to the layers at any time, just type in layer and click onto the layer that you want to change, and you're able to change anything. So you can change the color, you can change the thickness, you can change whatever you want from the layer. And previously I did dashed, but maybe this time I'm going to do dash divide times 2. So I'm going to do that instead and see what that looks like. So it's a bit better, but it's still not very visible at the moment. But that will still show as a nice thin line, a grey line in our plan. So that's all of the layers that we've taken the existing plan and we've changed the layers. The way that, now that you've got your layer set up, the way that you should start drawing your layers in the future is by choosing the layer in the beginning without having anything selected, and then start drawing. So you can see now that I'm drawing a thick line from scratch. So my computer knows that this is a thick line. And then when I want to hatch something, I go over and I type in thick line, click in my thin line, click on my hatch. And now I can select this hatch and fill it. So you can start to select the layer and then draw instead of doing it the other way around. Now, we've used this to define lots of different lines. It's worth noting, I said before that we want all of these to print black. This one's going to print grey, but they're all going to print black and white. The reason that they're different colours is because in CAD, AutoCAD doesn't want to make this a thick line. It wants to keep everything as thin as possible so that you can be as accurate as possible. You can imagine if this was quite a thick line, it may be quite difficult to, if we're drawing a line here, to know where the exact end or the exact corner of the line is. So the reason everything is coloured is so that slowly but surely, the more you use AutoCAD, the more you will begin to think and understand that pink equals thick, red equals thin, green equals medium, and all of the other colours that I showed you before. So yellow is slightly thicker than red, the turquoise is slightly thicker than the green, and the blue is slightly thinner than the pink. So slowly but surely, the more you use AutoCAD, the more these colours mean something, and it means that when you take a quick glance at this plan, you will be able to understand that this is going to be a thick line and this is going to be a thin line. So it's almost as though you have to train your brain a little bit into understanding what each of the colours signifies. So that's layers, and it's also intrinsically linked to line weights. So we are defining the line weights by selecting the layers, and that is how we turn the plan as we had it previously, which was all on one line weight. We can begin to make our plans more legible and easier to read for people when they are looking at our plans, and they can begin to be as clear as drawings like this, where I can imagine that with this drawing we would use the grey line for everything apart from the structure, and the structure we would draw in the thick line, the pink line. So that is layers and line weights, and as you can imagine, in another drawing, the drawing that I showed you previously, instead of having, you see here we've got 6 layers. Instead of having 6 layers, we have probably about 50 layers, which becomes a little bit harder to manage. There will be a layer for plug sockets and a layer for window panes, and a layer for furniture, a layer for lights. So every single thing that makes up a building will have its own layer. But I think for an academic drawing, for a student project, I think that it is best to have a simplicity. Now, one of the benefits of having layers is that you can turn layers off one by one. So right at the top, there are lots of different little icons here. You're actually able to turn layers on and off. So if you select your layer and then isolate, so actually I'm going to select the wall instead. So if you select the pink and then click isolate, it turns off absolutely everything apart from the pink. Now this isn't necessarily the most useful in academic drawings, so student project drawings, but you can imagine if you are drawing a plan in practice, and when you're talking to the clients, you want to show them where all of the furniture is and how the furniture works within the space, and then you also want to use the same drawing to provide information to the builders or the engineers. You can turn off the furniture as long as you've drawn all of the lines properly and made sure that they're all on the correct layers. You can turn off the furniture for the drawings to the builders. You can turn off all of the light switches when you're talking to the client. So being able to identify layers separately means that you are able to turn layers on and off, and it makes a drawing very useful because it means you can use it for multiple people. And the way that I turn them all back on was I just press the opposite button, which is unisolate layer. So there's isolate layer and unisolate layer. So that's how to create layers. Now the reason that we create layers is so that we can print. And the way that we tell AutoCAD how to print is with a plot table. Now I have uploaded a plot table to the digital recordings folder. It's called digi.ctb, and in essence what this does is it's a file that confirms this information that we've previously talked about. So it is a file that tells the computer everything that is pink to be printed thick, and everything that is and it's going to be printed black. So you can see here I just clicked on the plot table. You don't necessarily have to click on this plot table, but it's interesting to show you what information is inside. So you can see here this is color 1, and this corresponds to our red. So what in essence this plot table is saying is that if something is red, if we make it red in our layers, it will print as black. It will be we will use the line type of the object, which is something that we specify in AutoCAD. It will be 0.05 millimeters thick, so a relatively thin line. If something is yellow, it will print as black, and it will be 0.9. And you can see they start to get thicker and thicker until Color 6, the pink, is the thickest line. And you can see they're all printing black. But you can see here that this color is printing as well, it says 173, 173, 173. That means that's the RGB of this color, so it's going to print as a color. You can see here, you can select what colors print out as. So you could say color 9, select color, and you're able to select. Obviously, you can see here I have told it to print at the color that it's shown in the panel. But what you can do is you can open your plot table and you can change these. So if you find that the thin line is too thin, you can make it a bit thicker. And if you find that the thick line needs to be way thicker, you can just make it double. And it means that every time you draw a line, it will print at a certain way. But if you keep the generic one from this Digi plot table for now, then that is, I think that's a good place to start. Now if I go back to AutoCAD, there are a few places where the plot table is, we have to make sure that the plot table is included and confirmed. The first is on our property box down the corner, you can see it says plot style table, and you click on it. I think at the moment yours will say it will say nothing. So you can see I have lots. We want to make sure that it says Digi. If you can't find Digi, then what you have to do is you have to load up the plot table. So the first thing that I would tell you to do is download the plot table from the Digi Recordings folder. And then when you've downloaded it and you've saved it somewhere specific and you know where you've saved it, what you can do is you can go to Format, Plot Style, click on Plot Style, and then if you click on the drop-down box, you can import. And this is where you can click on it, find the Digi plot table, and then as soon as you have imported it, you should be able to select it. And here, Digi. So I've selected my plot table as the Digi plot table. And what that means is that all of the lines will print out as we've previously discussed. So the pink line will be 0.25 millimeters and black. The red line will be 0.05 millimeters and black. And the green will be 0.13 millimeters and black. And here the grey will be a grey that is thin as well. So just make sure that it says plot style table here, and that will help us when we are printing. So we have looked at layers, we've looked at line weights, and we've looked at the thing that manages and helps those pieces of information talk to the printer, which is the plot style table. It should be worth saying that Bicolor is something that should be automatically selected, but just make sure that it is. And what that Bicolor means is that it's just confirming that if something is a red, it will print at this thickness. If something is a yellow, it will print at this thickness. If something is a green, it will print at this thickness. So just make sure that all of those are selected. And that is how we begin to add a degree of clarity to our drawing. The ultimate reason we're adding clarity to our drawing is because we want to be able to print them and for people to be able to read them and understand them as clearly as possible. So now we're going to look at how to print. Previously, everything that we have been working on has been in the model space. So this black background space, this infinite space that goes on forever, potentially, and where we draw everything at scale 1:1, is called the model space. If you look, here it is here, this is how you access it. If you look here, there are also, there are other tabs. What we're going to do is if you press the Create New Layout, we click on that, what it will do is it will create a new layout for us, and the layout is the paper space. So you can see here, here's the layout, You can see at the moment it's showing as coloured. We can sort all of that out. The first thing to do is to rename the layout. So if you right click, you can rename. I'm going to call this A3 new. I'm doing that just to differentiate it from the one that already exists. The next thing to do is obviously to see that it has shown this box on the paper. So I'm just going to select that and delete it. So this is your paper. This piece of white here represents your paper. Now, the first thing we need to do is confirm the size and the setup of the paper. So as long as you're on the tab that we've just created, you can go to File, Page Setup Manager. If you click on that, make sure we're on A3 New, which is the one that we've just created, and go down to the little settings wheel and edit. Now this will allow you to define a number of things about your paper. So here you're able to say what size it is, so A3, whether it is portrait or landscape. It's really important that we make sure that it is in millimeters. And when we change it to millimeters, this strange number appears. That's a conversion between a millimeter and an inch. We just want to make sure that it says 1:1 again. So make sure that it says 1:1 and millimeters. Here it says plot style table. So we've already talked about plot style tables. Just make sure that we have Digi chosen. The quality, normal, is fine. Make sure that it says print object line weights, because obviously we've worked quite hard to create separate lines with different line weights. So make sure that we print those. You can either have print transparency ticked or not. Obviously, all of the lines that we've created so far don't have any transparency to them, so I'm going to leave it unticked. But if you do have any lines that are 50% transparent or something like that, then you can click that. So that's how you create, that's how you confirm your setup. Click OK at the end of it in order to create your paper. I'm going to click cancel because I've already set one up, but you click OK and then you should be able to confirm your layout. Now, this is the sheet as we had it previously, so I'm just going to delete that. This is my A3 sheet. What I'm going to do is next show you how to create a window onto this sheet to the model. So in essence what we do is we have our sheet set up and then we create a window that shows us our model space, and that is how we create our print. Okay, so we have our A3 piece of paper that we've defined in the page setup manager, and we now want to create a window or a viewport, as they're called in AutoCAD, that projects our model space onto a piece of paper. The way that we do that is we type in Viewport, and when we type in Viewport and type in enter, what will happen is this box will appear, this page will appear. If we make sure that it is 2D, that is current and 2D wireframe, that is all we need. Just changed it, but I'll change it back to 2D wireframe, press OK. Now what you're able to do is you're able to create a box. So if you click, drag your mouse across and then click again, you create a viewport, and you can see what's happened is that our model here has appeared on a piece of paper. You can see that it's showing with all of the colours of the model. If you want it to show black and white, like it will print, then what you can do is you can go to File, Page Setup Manager, And if we're in A3 now, so this is the one that I made previously, but obviously you will probably only have one of these, so click onto the one that you want to change, go edit, and then if you type that right at the top, yours should say Digi. Mine changed, but yours should say Digi. The important thing is display plot styles. So if you click that and then press OK and close, you can see that it will begin to display with the colors, and here you can see the dash that we created. So we've got a dashed grey line. We have our black, the lines as they would print, black. If you want to check the line thicknesses, you can come down to this bottom panel at the left and you can hover over Show Hide Line Weight. So if you click on it, you can see that it will show you what lines are thick and what lines are thin. And that means that you're able to see how the drawing is going to print when it is printed. So sometimes that is quite useful to have on because it means that you can have a good idea of what the printing, what the page is going to look like. So with the viewport, it's an object that exists on a piece of paper. What we're able to do is, at the moment, the viewport has just zoomed to everything that has been drawn. So you can see it's just zoomed to capture everything. If we double click in the viewport, we're now able to affect the viewport itself, which means that we're able to set the scale. So if you double click on the viewport and then come down to the bottom right hand corner, there's a little drop down list, viewport scale, and you should be able to do something like this, 1 to 50. So by doing that, I've now set the scale of this drawing. So this is an A3 piece of paper and this is a 1 to 50 drawing. I could try 1 to 20, but it may be too big. It's too big for this piece of paper, so I'm going to go back to 1 to 50. So sorry, that's the annotation scale, but I'm going to go down here and change the scale of the viewport, 1 to 50. And then when you're happy with it, you can click this little lock next to it. So you can lock the viewport. Now that means that the viewport has been locked. So everything that we have defined has been locked. And in order to get out of the viewport, if you just click into the paper space, then that will allow you to exit the viewport. So now what we have is we have an A3 piece of paper. We have our drawing at 1 to 50. We can zoom in, we can see the line thicknesses. And you can see, obviously, all of the grid lines that we have and the box around the drawing. The grid lines will not print. So when we print it, the only things that will print are the things that we have drawn. The last thing to mention is this line. So when we print it, at the moment, this box that I've highlighted will also print. That's okay if you like that line, but what you can do is you can make this box smaller, and there may be situations where you want to do that by just clicking on each of these corners. There may be a situation where you want to have multiple plans on one drawing. So what you can do is you can now use and modify this viewport like it was any other shape. So you can enter, you can move it along, you can highlight it and type CO, enter, which is copy. So you can create 2 if you so wish. We can make this one just of this strange shape that we created. So you can begin to have multiple drawings on one piece of paper. But obviously, if you have multiple drawings on one piece of paper, you may not want these boxes visible. So this is where the def ports layer comes in. You can see here I have it here. Def ports, if you put these 2 boxes on def ports, the plan will print, but the box won't. Now, if you can't see a layer that says def ports, if you go back to your model and type in layer, if you create, I'm going to delete this so that we can, I can't delete it, so I will just create a new one that's also def ports. If you create any layer and call it def points instead of def ports, it will not print. So if you create any layer called def points, it will automatically not print. So if you create a layer called def points, we go back into our piece of paper, we select these two boxes and make sure that they're on def points, then these boxes will not print. And the final thing to do is to print a PDF. So with a MacBook, you're able to go File, Print, and then as the print bounding box appears, make sure that it's A3, it's 1:1, and then you can just come down to the bottom left and save as PDF. And if we save as PDF, and I'm going to call this Plan 1 to 50. Save. So we've saved a PDF. And if we come down to our, there we go, there's our plan at 1 to 50 as a PDF. Now, it is slightly different in using Windows software. So using AutoCAD for PC will mean that the printing process is slightly different. Things like the page setup manager are found in a slightly different location. Hopefully it's intuitive and therefore you'll be able to find it. But what I will do is I will link to another YouTube video below this YouTube video with somebody else's tutorial for how to print using a Windows PC. So hopefully we'll cover all of that with either this video or the one that I link below. So that's it for looking at layers, line weights, plot tables, and how to print. So hopefully that means that we should be able to print something that we have drawn. That makes me think that with what we have gone through so far, we're in a position to begin drawing our case study plans. Next week we will be importing PDFs, and we will be importing Digimap drawings, Digimap information. So it may be that you have to wait until next week until you feel comfortable enough to be able to draw your case study. But we're now getting to a point where we've looked at all of the basic tools and modifiers. We've looked at more advanced tools and hatching. We've looked at how to create and define layers, and also what effect that has for line weights. And we've looked at how to create a layout here, and how to create viewports, and how to draw new viewports, and also how to adapt those viewports so that they create a layout that works for your piece of paper, and then also how to print it as a PDF. So we're getting to a point now where case studies may be, you may be able to draw them. In terms of what we're going to be doing next, if I zoom out and look at the page before, so we're on week 4, lesson 4, sorry. Next week we will be looking at how to download CAD maps from Digimap, which is obviously quite useful, how to manipulate the CAD map within AutoCAD, and then how to export the CAD into other softwares, and also how to scale from PDF. So obviously we're going to be looking specifically at Digimap, but that might be useful for your case study drawings as well, if your tutors have given you a case study as a PDF. So next week will be the last week of AutoCAD, and hopefully by the end of next week you will have enough understanding of an introduction to AutoCAD to be able to use it for more and more drawings as you go on throughout the year.